I'm checking our costs on Azure and I see something pretty strange. Why you keep exporting your data from Azure Data Explorer and load the same data back again to Azure Data Explorer, which is causing some unnecessary costs? Why? Oh, actually, I just wanted to make sure I'm using the most out of your credit card that we are paying our Azure subscription with. I'm just kidding, actually. That's a very good point, and here's my challenge. So I do have my data in Azure Data Explorer for some very fast and interactive analysis, but at the same time, I want to use a machine learning model over this data for some predicted values. But my machine learning model is trained and registered in Azure ML, which is a separate service. So I thought maybe I had to export the data from Azure Data Explorer to Azure ML, apply my model there, and load the data back to Azure Data Explorer. There's a much better way to do so. You can just let your machine learning model be accessible to your Azure Data Explorer. For example, you can store it in a blob, or you can serialize your machine learning model and load it to Azure Data Explorer, which has a Python plugin as well. So you can do your machine learning model scoring in Azure Data Explorer that has your data as well. That's it. Pretty simple. I have no clue how to do it. No idea. Okay, I'll show you. Let's go! Hello everyone, this is MG and hoping you're doing great and welcome to another video. You might have already used Azure Data Explorer, which is a service on Azure that is fully managed for high performance, specifically with big data that you can do even near real-time analysis in a very fast manner. And now the question is, if you have a machine learning model that is trained in Azure Machine Learning, which is a separate service, how you can utilize that model for a data that you have in Azure Data Explorer that you're doing some analysis, and now you can apply your machine learning model over that data to do some even predictive analytics as well. So let's check it out, that what's going to be an efficient way of integrating Azure Machine Learning that we have a trained machine learning model with through Azure Data Explorer. Let's check it out. Before we start, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so you will get notified for the next video. Thank you. First of all, let's start with what is Azure Data Explorer. So this is a platform as a service or PaaS solution that was initially announced by Microsoft in almost 2018. It is a fully managed platform specifically for big data. If you want to do some ad hoc interactive analysis, specifically again for real-time data, this is the service to go. It's extremely fast with just seconds of latency, and you can pretty much do main analytics over your data. If you, let's say, have some real-time data coming in, if you have some logs and metrics, you can have them end-to-end get analyzed in Azure Data Explorer over a cluster that you create there. Here are some examples mentioned. For example, some IoT devices, application, any sort of data, not just real-time. Real-time is as an example here, that you can have the service there. It has some built-in time series analysis. It has some built-in AI-based analysis. For example, you can have some sort of anomaly detection here over a trend of your data. So if you create an Azure Data Explorer, here's what I created on mine. So technically you can see that this is the name that I chose for my Azure Data Explorer, and as soon as I created one, you have actually the option of creating a cluster. So if you want to specify a number of cores and capabilities of a cluster, when you create this Azure Data Explorer, Azure will ask you how big and powerful you want to have that cluster. Is it for dev purposes? Is it for production purposes? So you have multiple options there, and you can always scale out. So This is now running. I don't want to stop it. And as soon as I get in, I created a database inside this Azure Data Explorer. So in order to create one, the only thing that you need to do, just click on Add Database, and you can give it a name. You can set up also a retention period, and done. And also cache period. So how long you want to keep the data. So for this specific use case that we want to have a walkthrough to see how we can train a machine learning model in Azure ML using an open source data, and the data is actually the link of that data is available in the notebook of the codes that I'm going to run, and I will add the link of that notebook to the video description here, so you can check out the data and download it from there. So let's say the data is available in Azure Data Explorer. How I actually did it, because I downloaded the data before, so I created a database and I clicked on the database here, and you can, if you go to the query section, you can also do some sort of queries here, and you can check out all the tables that I have. So these are the tables that I created, and if you want to create one, you just need to right click on the database that you have, click on ingest data, and in this portal you will be able to first say that where you want to store the data. So this is the cluster I created, and this is the database I created, and this cluster is my Azure Data Explorer. You give it a name to the table, you click on next, and here you can specify what is the source. Is it blob, file, ADX Gen 2, Events Hub, or it is something on your local machine, so you can browse and upload it here. And after clicking on next, it will show you the schema, and next it's gonna ingest the data. That's how I did it, so I don't want to do it again. And you can see that I had my initial data appeared here. So if you want to check out the data, you just need to sort of type the name of the table that you created or ingested and click on run. There you go. Actually, let me check out the other one that I changed the schema. There you go. So this data set has some metrics or features about temperature, humidity, CO2, light, humidity ratio to tell us if there's an occupancy with the given place or not. So that's a sort of classification challenge that we are tackling here. So with the given inputs, whether we have an occupancy or not, 0 or 1. So now I have this data available in Azure Data Explorer, and I want to train a model in Azure Machine Learning to predict that occupancy for me, and I want to apply that model here because I have the data here. So now let's go to our Azure Machine Learning. So here's the notebook that I ran, and again I add the link of this notebook to the video description, and this is the place that I downloaded the data. So the first thing that I want to do is training a model using the data that I showed you. I want to train the model here, and then score that model in Azure Data Explorer, or ADX. That's an abbreviation for Azure Data Explorer. As usual, so I'm importing the required packages and connecting to my workspace. As you all know now, if I want to do anything with this Azure ML workspace, this is the object that I will refer to. So the first thing that I need to do is installing KQL Magic command line here. So what is KQL Magic? If I go to back my Data Explorer, Azure Data Explorer, you saw that I had some codes that they're not SQL, but they can be close to SQL, and this is what is called KQL. So KQL stands for Custom Query Language, or again KQL, which is a sort of it's pretty similar. This language is pretty similar to SQL. It is mainly used in Azure Data Explorer for querying the data, do some analysis, and also if you have used log analytics in Azure, if you want to check out the logs of your Azure services, that's the same sort of language that you're going to use. So the question is, if I want to use that language, is it a must to use Azure Data Explorer because that's the only place that knows KQL? Well, the answer is no. This is exactly what I'm doing. Because I want to execute some of my codes from Azure ML to Azure Data Explorer, so I have to use KQL, right? And KQL has a plugin that you can even use Jupyter Notebook to run your KQL. So if you install this package, you can write down KQL code which your Azure Data Explorer understand, but you can run them or write them inside Jupyter Notebook. So install this package, and in order to initiate this, just run this magic command line, and you can see that there you go. KQL query language is a query language for advanced analytics, blah blah blah. It has been used also for Azure Monitor, Azure Data Explorer, so on and so forth. So now I can use it in my Jupyter Notebook. So in order to connect to my Azure Data Explorer using this KQL language, you just need to type down this command line, custom code cluster. This is the name of your Azure Data Explorer. This is mine that I chose, and this is the region, and this is the database that you created, and this is the name of that. This is my database that I created, AML test. And I ran, so in order to make sure that I can execute my KQL language from Jupyter Notebook to Azure Data Explorer, this is a test I'm doing. So I created occupation detection 01 table. Remember, I showed you how I uploaded this data with Azure Data Explorer, and here's the table that I created. Let me go back to the code that I executed. There you go. So when I run this code in Azure Data Explorer, it shows that I have the data in my Azure Data Explorer. But let's check if we can run the same command from Azure ML and get the results back to Azure ML. This is the command line. So it's telling that using KQL, hey, go through that occupation detection 01, the table that we just saw, convert it to data frame and print the first 4 rows. That's it. So I was able to read the data because I ran the KQL language inside Jupyter Notebook to connect to Azure Data Explorer and get that table that I have with the given name. Perfect. The connection is there, and now I can start my progress. So in order to train a model over this data, that data needs to be accessible to my AML cluster. So I can grab it from Azure Data Explorer or export it to a blob and then load the data from blob to Azure ML. This is what this code gonna do. So with the given storage account name and container name and SAS token, if you know SAS token, it's like a token that you can create for any single file to be able to load that data from blob. So you can load the data from there, and then in Azure ML you have the data to move on. So what I did here, because the data was small and we are testing here, I uploaded the data here as well with just a manual upload here, and this is my data. This is the same data that I have in Azure Data Explorer that I want to now train a model here. So let me move on. I'm reading the data. It's pretty simple scikit-learn regression classification model that I'm creating here. My train and test data is there. I am choosing the notebook that I'm using. Actually chose 4 models. I trained them, and here are the performance of the models. I actually dumped them, and you can see that the models or pickle files are saved here in my working directory. And as you know, you can register any model you want in Azure ML. Here I chose logistic regression pickle file and I registered it in my workspace. Now the question is, I have the model trained with the data, but I want to use the model inside Azure Data Explorer because my data is there. So I want to do the scoring in ADX. How can I do it? Is there a way that I can push or ship my machine learning model, let's say logistic regression pickle file, to Azure Data Explorer? The answer is yes, and this is what we're going to do. So in order to do so, you need to serialize your pickle file or model and make it as a table in Azure Data Explorer. So in order to do the same, we are creating a table with the given model name. That's the model name that I chose, with the given timestamp, which is now, and with the given model I want to register that table. So where's that model? It's called S model. S model is here. What is that? You can see that this is using a serialized code of the model that I have, which is a pickle file here. So I read this pickle file, I serialize it, and then when I have the serialized model or S model, I can ship it to a table, and here's the results. You can see that the given model name with the given time, here's the serialized model. In order to make sure that now I can ship these results or data frame to my Data Explorer, again, I have to use KQL language. So I have a query to have this table, and then submit the query to ADX, and there you go. You can see that there's a table created for me with the serialized model there. Let's check it out in Data Explorer to make sure our serialized model is there. So I go back to Data Explorer. There you go. There's a table here for me. Let me check this out. So let me open a new tab, double click on ML models, just run and check out what this table is. There you go. You can see that I have serialized 6 models before I record this video. You might see just one because you just serialized one model. And here's the serialized model value. Perfect. Now I have the model value serialized in Data Explorer. And now let's see how we can apply this over my data. And you might guess, yes, we need Python code. So how can I write Python code in Azure Data Explorer? Let me go back to my Azure ML and show you how we can do it. So Azure Data Explorer has a Python plugin that you need to enable it. In order to check how you need to enable it, go back to Azure Data Explorer, go to configurations, make sure the Python language extension is on, and then save if it's not on. By default, I think it's off, so make sure you switch to that. Now you should be able to also run Python functions over your Azure Data Explorer. You can see here that I have a query that I want to submit to my Azure Data Explorer that is using Python, which is fine. So let's see what is this query that gonna does the scoring for me in Azure Data Explorer. So in this query, I'm saying that, hey, this is the classification that I'm gonna do. I want to give you a model with these specific information and with the given model name. I want to give you some features. These are the inputs, and then give me the predicted value. So we're gonna fill them later. So what we will do with these values? Well, we do some specific transformation to make sure ADX can understand them. We pack the input features, and then we are importing pickle. Remember, we want to do a scoring in Python, so I want to load the pickle file. That's why I'm importing pickle and ASCII as well. And then with the given model or serialized model and input features that we're specifying, I'm gonna load the model and then do the prediction with the loaded pickle file or the serialized model, and then I ship the results back as a new data column of the data frame, which I call it prediction, to my results. That's it. So this is like a function that I have specified, and I have to call this or invoke this. This is the place that I'm invoking it. So I'm saying to Azure Data Explorer that, hey, there's a table that I created before, which is here. Let me go back to my, sorry, I have so many tabs. Let me go to the database again. So imagine this table like your input table that you want to do prediction. It's like your inferencing data. So you can see occupation detection. I have multiple versions of that, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let me go back to my ML. So here's the input data. Where test is true, that's a column that I created to actually indicate which row is going to be used for training or testing. You can just ignore this. So over this table, I want to extend this table with an additional column, which is the predicted values, and it's going to be Boolean because I want to do yes or no. How I can do the prediction? Well, there's a function that I want to invoke, which is here, that this will go over the this table that I have serialized models. There's a model that I have serialized that I showed you in Azure Data Explorer, and here are the input features from that table, and here's the predicted value, and then summarize it because I want to calculate the confusion matrix. This is my query, and now I want to submit this query to Azure Data Explorer. The same thing. We use KQL, the magical command, and we ship the query to Azure Data Explorer, and then the result is back as a data frame. And you can see that I have confusion matrix because I'm using the summarize. So it says that when the occupancy was 1 or true, and how many times the model predicted true. So true, positive, false, positive, so on and so forth. And you can see the prediction happened in Azure Data Explorer, and Azure ML did nothing here for prediction. So the model is in Azure Data Explorer. We serialize the model there, and the data is there as well. I'm just submitting my query and upload everything to Azure Data Explorer. So no need to export your data from Azure Data Explorer to somewhere else to do the prediction. There is another way that you can also use Azure Data Explorer for model prediction. What you can do, instead of serializing your model and load the model to Azure Data Explorer, which what we did, you can store your model in a blob, and Azure Data Explorer can load your model from a blob and do the prediction over a table that you have in Azure Data Explorer. And this is the example. I didn't run it, just want to show you how you can do it. Very similar of what you did. The same similar function that we have for running inferencing in Azure Data Explorer. The only difference is, instead of saying that, hey, go to that table with the given model name, load the serialized model and do prediction, I'm giving it a URI. Go to this place to load the model. And where is that place? That place is a blob URI that I have my pickle file loaded there. So this is the pattern of a model URI. You can see the storage account that you have on Azure over a container name, a blob name. You have your model loaded, and make sure you generate a SAS token for that as well, so ADX can use it to load the model. So in a nutshell, two ways you can do model inferencing in Azure Data Explorer. The first way, serialize your model that you train in Azure ML and push it as a table to Azure Data Explorer so Data Explorer can use it. Second way is save your model in a blob storage, and using the URI of that model, which is in blob, you can load the data to Azure Data Explorer and then use it for inferencing there. So that was all about how you can train a model in Azure ML, but do the scoring or prediction in Azure ADX without having you needed to export the data out of Azure Data Explorer. So you can still keep everything there and do the prediction even inside Azure Data Explorer. That's it. When we were kids in the backyard playing astronaut and rock stars, no one asked us to stop it, or no one called us unrealistic. And suddenly we were 18, going to college for plan B. What you want is too risky. We have all got these big ideas. One day they replaced with fear. How did we came here? Darling, don't quiet your daydream. It's all your life that you're making. Take care, my friends, and we'll see you in the next video.